folks, it is time to talk about this bike. This is our 2022 Honda CRF300L. And as you can see, we have put nearly 500 miles on it now. My brother-in-law Jeremy and I are the Southwest RV creators, and this bike belongs to him. However, I have now ridden it more than he has, and so he and I both decided that I should do the first review video of the bike. To my knowledge, so far, the only things that we have added to this bike are this bar pad and these hand guards. I just spent 2 full days and 260 miles of riding in Utah's Arapeen trail system that's in the mountains, and it was an awesome ride. Ton of fun. There was a variety of terrain that we rode, everything from asphalt roads to black diamond rock trails to forest roads, and this is the bike that I rode. This was the perfect bike for me for that ride, and I did not know that going into the ride, but I quickly discovered it. As we began the ride, I felt immediately at home on this bike, which is a little funny because it's different in a lot of ways from the other bikes that I've owned. I didn't anticipate that I would feel so comfortable on it so quickly, but I did. And that made the ride very enjoyable. Going into the ride, I thought that this bike would feel very heavy to me and that would be a problem. Yeah. What's incredible to me is that the way this bike carries its weight, to me, makes it feel lighter than my CRF300X that I've been riding all summer. And that may seem counterintuitive, but that's how it feels to me, even though it's 50 plus pounds heavier. I now love this bike, and so much of my love for this bike comes from the fact that it has such a low seat height. Not only that, it's a comfortable seat. I was never uncomfortable on that seat, even after one day that we spent over 14 hours riding. If I owned this bike, I wouldn't feel a need to change the seat. I love the seat height, love the seat. Let's talk power delivery. I'm a huge fan of that motor. I love the bottom end torque that it provides, and it pulls nicely all the way up. Chugging along the trails, particularly the Black Diamond trails, is where I really noticed it, where we were working our way up a very difficult, loose, rocky climb, a place where frankly we really didn't belong. We shouldn't have been there, in terms of it was more of a 4x4 ATV trail, but we conquered it, and this bike was able to chug along incredibly well at near idle speeds as I negotiated that climb. And it has a very impressive resistance to stalling out. And so that's one thing I loved about this motor. Another thing I love is the transmission. The transmission to me is, I would call it flawless. I love the shifter, the way that it shifts. I love the fact that the gears are displayed on the display, and so at any time you can look down and see which of the 6 speeds you're in. I love that it is a 6-speed. It has an excellent 6th gear for being out on the road, on the asphalt. It's tall. And it also has a nice low 1st gear. I feel no need to gear it down or up. If I owned this bike, I would do nothing with the gearing. Honda did a great job cooling this bike. It never overheated in the slow, rocky, technical sections where one of the other bikes on the ride was overheating. And part of that's because it does have a fan, and I would hear that fan kick on. But I've just noticed from experience that these 300 class bikes, particularly the KLX 300 and the CRF 300L, do not tend to overheat, even in that slow, technical, tough stuff. I also love how quiet the bike is. It has a nice exhaust note. In my opinion, it sounds strong, but it is very quiet, and the exhaust is never annoying or tiresome. If I owned this bike, I would do nothing with the exhaust. That clutch is so light. I love it. And those brakes, front and back, are so good. I even really enjoyed the ABS off-road. I have no complaints. It did a great job keeping that front tire from washing out on me. Fuel capacity was awesome, was spot on for the riding that we did. you know, between stops, we would ride all morning from early until lunch or a little after. I never needed to stop for fuel in there. I would stop at lunchtime, we would top off, but I never came close to running out of fuel. It was never a worry. So for my type of riding, the fuel capacity and the fuel economy, which seemed to average right around 65 for our riding, which to me was very impressive, both have me very satisfied. Leading up to the ride, I noticed that comments regarding the suspension from both just everyday riders like me to professionals, they all said there seemed to be a general consensus that the suspension is set up for comfort, but not for aggressive riding. And I agree with that. After being out on the trail, the KLX300, my buddy Austin was riding a brand new KLX300 that we were able to compare back to back during the ride, switch off from time to time. The KLX300 did have a more playful suspension setup in terms of handling whoops and jumps and things like that. However, he and I both agreed that perhaps this suspension aims more toward comfort. And I felt that. And at my age, at 39, I've gotten to a point where I lean towards comfort. I want I want the tires, I want the suspension to soak up all the chop in the trail, the little rocks, the little roots, the ruts. And I have never ridden a bike that did that better than this one. Between the soft seat and the soft suspension, I was very pleased. I was surprised, almost shocked at how comfortable this bike was to ride all day. And again, if I owned it, I would not change a thing, because, you know, there's a moment here or there when I feel playful and I do a little jump or a hop on the trail, and you can feel the suspension go through most of its stroke, but it was never a problem for me. My biggest complaint would be that on repetitive whoops, on repetitive ups and downs in the trail, the back end can start bucking like this, depending on how you manage or mismanage the experience. And that got bothersome maybe twice during the ride. But besides that, I loved it. Love the suspension setup. Some folks complain about the stock tires for this ride that we did. That included everything, like I said, from asphalt to loose surfaces to sharp rocks to forest roads, gravel. I have no complaints about these tires. In fact, a couple of us were wearing Pack Talk headsets and we were able to visit during the ride. And at one point I mentioned to them, these tires almost feel magnetic to the trail. Very good traction. I told them while we were out riding, I said, guys, if this was my bike, I wouldn't change a thing when it comes to the tires. I'm perfectly happy with them. In fact, I'd be worried about switching the tires out for fear that maybe I would adversely affect the performance. To me, they were very predictable, and that is comforting and confidence inspiring for me. As far as I'm concerned, that fuel injection is spot on. It didn't matter if we were at 11,000 feet at the top of Skyline Drive or down closer to 5,000 feet in the valleys. The bike just ran perfectly all the time, and it pulls flawlessly from the bottom to the top at any elevation or any of the temperatures that we encountered. I have to say that Honda nailed it with this display. It is so good, and it's filthy right now because I've been using the bike as it's meant to be used. But I just love all of the information available on that display. It's impressive, it's helpful, and I found myself quickly relying upon it. Everything, even down to the tachometer, watching my RPMs. Great display, and it has so much more to offer than just what you see here. I used these mirrors the entire ride. I wouldn't change them. They even took a beating. I dropped the bike at least 5 times, a couple of them pretty hard during the ride, and the mirrors don't show any, I don't know if it's just lucky, but they were not adversely affected by the falls. I had to adjust them a couple of times, but nothing bent or broke or cracked. Thank you, Honda, for putting some nice wide, big pegs on the bike. These were very comfortable for several days of riding. I've got no complaints about the pegs. They are much larger, for example, than the stock pegs on the KLX300. Okay, let's talk about a couple of I don't know if I'll call them complaints. It could be a complaint or just an observation. I love how bright the headlight is, low and high beam. It's got a nice bright headlight. I didn't feel a need for more light, but this is something I did notice was at night, and we did quite a bit of night riding because our days were long. I found myself toggling back and forth between high beam and low beam. High beam was very bright and threw it a lot of light. However, high beam seemed to bring all the light up, brighter and up, and it was not illuminating as well the trail directly in front of the bike. But when I'd switch back to low beam, it would illuminate the trail directly in front of the bike, right where my tire was going and where I needed to be paying attention. It did a better job of that. But then I wanted to see what was out further ahead of me, and so I'd switch back to brights. And so I found myself in the dark constantly toggling back and forth between high beam and low beam. And what I noticed is it seems to be related to where the headlight is adjusted. I actually haven't looked to see if that's adjustable or not, but the sag in the suspension, I noticed that if I got up off the seat and kind of brought the suspension up just a hair by bouncing up, or when we were stopped by getting up off the seat, that it brought the high beam down perfectly to where it should be, I felt like. But as soon as I sat down, it brought it up. Or maybe I can get in there and adjust it. I need to figure that out. Almost as soon as we began riding the very first morning, I noticed that my right leg was feeling heat. And I thought that was interesting because I thought that the radiator was on both sides, but I was wrong. This side has the horn and it has the coolant tank. This side has the radiator, and that's the reason why I was feeling that heat, because it's, you know, the air is coming through here and then it's coming out right through here, right back to where my knee and my inner thigh was. And so it's not truly a complaint. It's more of an observation. It was never uncomfortably hot, but it was noticeable. And so during most of the ride, especially when it would get warmer and the temperatures would go up, the ambient temperatures, I would notice more heat coming back right here, and it had a tendency to warm my knee and my inner thigh here against the bike. And I can live with it. But that was an observation, and it surprised me a little bit. This is my biggest complaint about this bike, my one true gripe, and I frankly do not understand how this made it through R&D and development on this bike. This. As I'm riding, it is right in front of me. It is right in the middle of the display, constantly. My natural position for riding, it's right there. It doesn't look like it would have, to me, it would have been hard for Honda to move it up just an inch. Would have done it. Not down. Down it still obscures over here, but just moving it up an inch out of the way this direction. And I think I may be able to remedy that by altering something here. But holy cow, I just wonder, it's like, did nobody ever sit on the bike and try riding it? Surely they would have noticed. I've even had other people sit on the bike and notice it. That it's just, I'm just surprised. This bike is so well thought out. Everything about it impresses me. Absolutely everything. Except this. How did this happen? The old KLX300, I say old, it's an older design, but it's been updated. But my buddy's brand new KLX300, it's not a problem. You know, other bikes, I haven't seen it be a problem. But I guess my question is just, well, why, Honda? Why did you put that there? After spending 2 full days riding Honda's CRF300L in varied terrain, I would say I am in love with the bike. I did not expect that to happen, but it did happen, and I very quickly thought, I need one of these. It feels like Honda made this bike for me in every way, except for that brake line going across the display. But besides that, in every other way, it feels like Honda designed and made this bike for me. And that's after I've owned quite a few bikes and ridden even more. I'm very impressed with it, and now I really want one.